Well, thank you everybody for being here. This presentation is talking about your rights for First Amendment activity. I'm focused on animal rights activists, but you can use this in a wide plethora of different contexts. For those who don't know me, Iko Wee is one of the old timers here. I've known him for god-awful long time, but for those who don't know me, I've been an activist since the 90s. I've participated, this is old, 200 plus protests. I have no idea how many protests I've been in. I've been a National Lawyers Guild legal observer at about 30 sounds about right. That's me on the left with the National Lawyers Guild hat on. This is at the LA Zoo if you don't recognize it. Sharing some words with the park ranger. I've been a civil rights attorney here in California for about 11 years now. Member of the National Lawyers Guild, of course. I'm also a member of the National Police Accountability Project. The Police Accountability Project, it's a group of lawyers across the country who sue police for misconduct. Sometimes it's shootings, sometimes it's First Amendment, sometimes it's a variety of places, variety of contexts. My email address is easy to remember, jerry@activistlaw.com. Talk about speech and government. So Howard Zinn, who knows who Howard Zinn is? He's a delightful historian. He's the guy who tells the other historians what they get wrong. He's very anti, I'll say, the white narration of how history was, and he talks about history much more broadly. Protest beyond the law is a departure. It's not a departure from democracy. It's absolutely essential to it, taken from a historian. The concept of the Bill of Rights is that the Bill of Rights are our most sacred rights, they're our most treasured rights, and for the most part, they are taken in priority to other rights. That's not the case in every example, but that is the paradigm we work under, is that we are a free democracy. We are not in a police state, and because of that, our Bill of Rights, which I'll go into a little later, our Bill of Rights are take a special place, a big deference in the law. And so oftentimes when you're talking with judges, if you happen to talk with judges, they will bend over backwards to protect our civil rights, and only when they get to that point where they cannot protect your civil rights because you killed somebody, then that's when the Bill of Rights actually takes a back seat. We're not in a police state. It's important to absorb that our civil rights are important in this country, and this is what differentiates us from places like Iran and Russia, North Korea, etc. Bill of Rights are the first 10 amendments, and the concept of the Bill of Rights is it protects us from our government. That's the paradigm I have up here. The First Amendment is to exclude the federal government from ideas. That's speech, that's from the press, that's from religion. These are ideas. It protects us from government harassing us for our ideas. It is the right to exclude the federal government from guns, of course, for a well-regulated militia, which is another conversation. It's the right to exclude the federal military from our homes. Back in the colonial days, the British government would just put their soldiers in your home, whether you wanted them there or not. It's the right to exclude the government from body and personal property. This is the seizure. So this includes arrests. This includes the police going into your home and taking your stuff. It is the right to exclude the federal government from deprivation of life, liberty, and property without due process. And so if you are going to be put in prison, for example, or if the government wants to put you in prison, they have to go through due process. They have to prove that you belong in prison before they can put you there. They can't just shove you in there because they don't like you. It is the right to exclude the federal government from an unfair trial. It is the right to exclude the federal government from a summary trial. A summary trial is the judge. That means you have a right to a jury. We have the right to exclude the federal government from torturing prisoners. This is the cruel and unusual punishment clause. And from charging excessive penalties. They can't charge you $1 million for stealing a hamburger. Not that you will. It suggests that the government should not limit our natural rights. So the 9th Amendment is the only amendment without any teeth. It only says that all of the rights that we have as people are not necessarily in the Constitution. We have other rights. So those would be things like the right to marriage, the right to education. We have other rights that are not written in the Constitution. And we have the right to exclude the federal government from controlling the states. This was the great compromise when the states were formed, and the states didn't want the federal government from bossing them around. So these are our Bill of Rights. It's our first 10 amendments. Now we have many more amendments. One of the most important is the 14th Amendment. I put it here in context of the 13th, 14th, and 15th. After the Civil War, these three laws were enacted. The 13th abolishes slavery, and the 15th allows black men to vote. And so this is trying to activate black men into society. The 14th Amendment is huge. You have a lot of different rights in the 14th Amendment. Like right now, there's an effort to prevent Donald Trump from running for president based on one of those things in the 14th Amendment. There's a lot of information in there. What's relevant to us is that it includes the state governments in the Bill of Rights. If you remember on those earlier slides, I said it excludes the federal government from interfering with us. So the 14th Amendment says not only does the federal amendment not allow to interfere with our speech, but also the states. And with the states, that includes counties and cities. So it says all government cannot interfere with our speech. All government cannot put us in jail without a trial. And then equal protection, and I'll be going into more details later, but that means, for example, if there's a rodeo company that is using amplified sound, and the police say that you can't use amplified sound, equal protection means they need to treat us equally. So, no favoritism. Our magical amendment that gives us the right to speech is the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law limiting the freedom of speech or of the press or of the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So what's important here is not only is it our freedom of speech, but it's also our freedom to assemble. You can have a silent vigil and you are assembling, which is a form of speech. So it's not just verbal speech. It's the right to assemble. It's the right to associate with each other. If you want to be with a group of other animal activists, they can't force you not to be in a group of animal activists. It's the freedom of ideas. In California, California is a separate government from the federal government. It has its own constitution, and in our constitution in the federal government, it has the same protections as the federal government. Every people can freely speak, write, and publish his or her sentiments on all subjects. We also have in Section 3, people have the right to instruct their representatives, petition the government for a redress of grievances, and assemble freely to consult for the common good. So anytime that you are engaged in any form of free speech, you are using both the federal law and the state law to exclude the government from harassing you or from preventing you from having these values. Many times in lawsuits, I will bring a lawsuit under both sets of laws. There are different advantages to both sets. The way that this comes into effect largely in California, not in other states, we have the Ralph Act and we have the Bain Act. These are both best conceptualized as a law that will allow you to sue others on the basis of a hate crime. So these two laws are actually set up for hate crimes, and to say that if there are skinheads harassing Jews, if there are skinheads harassing blacks, whatever kind of a hate crime, that is something that the government, the police, will use hate crimes in order to arrest these people. But what if police aren't there to arrest? So these laws actually let you directly prevent those skinheads or whomever it is from harassing you. The elements are that you either need violence under the Ralph Act or you need threats, intimidation, and coercion under the Bain Act against you as a class. What that means is that they are targeting you, the police are targeting you, not because of who you are. They're not targeting Owe because he's Owe. They don't have a grievance against him. They're targeting Owe because he's a member of the class of animal rights activists. It is being targeted not on who you are, but what you represent in that sense. And it's broadly construed. Animal rights activist is a type of hate crime. There can be hate crimes against us. So there's violence or threats, intimidation, coercion against you as a class to prevent or interfere with your federal or state rights, which is of course the right to free speech. And so if you're at a protest and you are threatened with violence, you are threatened with arrest, trying to intimidate you from engaging in your free speech, not because of who you are, but because of who you represent, you can sue in court to make that stop happening. You can also sue for damages. You can sue, damages means that you've lost sleep. Somebody threatened to shoot you if you don't leave. you've lost sleep. I have a case right now where a vendor of a honey company threatened my client. He says some expletives. He says, I'm going to knock you out. She doesn't go to that part of this farmer's market anymore. It is a threat of violence based on who she is and who she represents. She loses sleep. She doesn't go to that part of the market. She can sue for money damages. That'll also teach the person a lesson. So as I talk about free speech, almost all speech that you engage in, almost all of it, is going to be protected. Dark blue. There is a very narrow sliver of speech that is not protected. It's restricted speech. That restricted speech is inciting violence. This is what supposedly happened on January 6th, right? Inciting violence is not protected. There was an anarchist demonstration in Long Beach in 2001, and supposedly the anarchists were inciting each other into a fervor, and that's why the police were able to shut down the demonstration, because of the incitement of violence. You're not allowed to do that. You can't make threats against others, which is like stalking. That's also speech that is illegal. You cannot make certain false statements of fact, which is typically fraud, defamation, or perjury. You can give a false opinion, right? I think I'm the best lawyer in the world. That might be false, but that doesn't make it illegal. It's only when your false statements of fact go to fraud, I'm trying to get money out of you, I'm the best lawyer in the world, you should pay me $100,000 for a consultation. Even that's kind of protected because it's opinion, but if I was really trying to get that money from you. Defamation, injuring somebody's reputation, that's not legal. And then perjury is swearing under oath after you raise your hand and say that you will. All right. Appropriating speech owned by others, which is usually copyright. You can't steal somebody else's speech, that's illegal. And then, it's not entirely relevant here, but unlawful conduct that you use as speech, which is to say flag burning. So legally you can burn the flag, but you're not allowed to commit arson. And so when your speech is conduct, the conduct is illegal, then they can say that the arson is wrong. They cannot say that burning the flag is wrong. That would also be amplified sound, for example. The amplified sound, they can say the amplified sound is wrong if it's injuring somebody, but they can't say that the speech that you have through the amplified sound is wrong. So think of it as it's conduct, physical actions. I wanted to spend a moment on demeanor as well, because our demeanor and how we present ourselves at protests, our demeanor is protected. You can say nasty things to other people, you can say nasty things to police, you can call police, it's not a vegan expression, but you can call police pigs. Whatever it is you want, you have protected speech. And the reason I have this here is because when these cases go to trial and the jury or the judge hears you being a nasty SOB, that's going to prejudice them against you. And so you are protected to do that. You are allowed to do that, but if you want to win a trial, don't do that. Think about it. I had a case that's very difficult because there are some instances where some of the individuals were being very loud and raucous and obnoxious legally in the presence of children. And so our concern is if there are going to be parents on the jury and they see these activists who are very nasty in the presence of children, it's their legal right to do it, but the jury is probably going to rule against them. And so when you're in your advocacy, if you think you're not going to go to trial, if you think there's no lawsuit, you can say whatever you want, that's legal, that's fine. But if you look for an attorney, and if you're carrying on negatively, that's going to hurt your chances to find an attorney to go to trial. Property paradigm is very big, and most people get this wrong. So in the property paradigm, I frequently hear people on the internet, and they say, hey, this is public property, I have the right to protest you. So wipe that idea out of your mind. The question of public and private property is very nuanced. And the greatest example is that the military, for example, I have here the military. That is government-owned property. If you go there to protest, if you go onto the base to protest, they will shoot you. Okay, you don't have the right to protest on that public property. What about private property? You own your home, somebody wants to protest at your home, whatever that would be, they can come to your home, it's private property, they can protest. It's your private property. So the paradigm, the better paradigm is that we used to have town squares. We really don't have those anymore. We used to have town squares, and the way the government looks at it is that if there is a given property that resembles the town square where people used to assemble, people used to share their thoughts, we're going to keep that tradition going. And the way that that comes out in the law, you have the most right to protest in the parks and the streets and the sidewalks. People have been using this for free speech for hundreds of years, and this country's only a few hundred years old. If there's an actual town square, I'm sure there are in some places, you have the most right in the town square. The next thing I have here is designated public fora. Designated public fora means the government opens up certain land for protest. Maybe it's not Park Street or sidewalk, but they open up a, maybe there's like a community theater, and they say that anybody who wants to give their thoughts on the community, at this community theater, they can do it. Then you have the most right to protest at that designated public forum, where the government says some people can, you can too. And as we're going more to the right, we have quasi-town squares. And these are those establishments that are like town squares, but they're not anymore. What would that be? What do we have in our society today that is like a town square, but it's not? It would be a shopping mall, right? Shopping mall, we have all these stores, we have walkways in between. This is what town squares have become. In California, not other states, in California, the government says that we don't have town squares anymore really, we still want free speech. You can practice your free speech in a shopping mall. That does not mean the individual store, that means the mall generally. So you don't have absolute right to protest there. You can see we're almost halfway down the list. You have a lot of rights to protest there. So if you want to go into a shopping mall and protest here in California, it's probably protected. We can talk about nuances, but they can't throw you out because it's private property. Because the shopping mall is owned privately, they cannot throw you out on that basis. Leased public property, oftentimes there's going to be, say there's a public park and they close part of the park off because they have some event. You probably have a lot of rights to protest there on leased public property. Again, there's nuance there, and if you want to plan a protest there, consult with an attorney to understand the nuance. And then in neighborhoods, you have a right to protest in a neighborhood. You can go to somebody's sidewalk outside their front door and you can protest in front of their front door. It's still a street, it's still a sidewalk. But the reason why neighborhoods are so close here to the right is because the law will protect people to be able to sleep, so that if they go to their car and they leave, they don't feel harassed. So you don't have the great expansive rights on the regular street sidewalk, but if you're inside of a neighborhood, you still have some rights to protest inside a neighborhood. I put a line through government buildings. Government buildings are, of course, public property. Mayor's office, you have no right to protest inside of the mayor's office. You have no right to go into a public building, post office, anything of the sort, and protest inside of there. It is not a place that the government recognizes as a place to exchange ideas. You go to the mayor's office, you're expected to be there for business with the mayor. You go to a post office, you're expected to be there for business with the post office, not to protest. I have private businesses here. That is going to typically be, for example, restaurants where some people do disruptions. Whole Foods. You have no right to protest inside the walls. You go there, you protest, you can be ordered to leave, you can be arrested. So anybody who tells you differently, I've heard differently, don't protest inside of a business unless you want to risk arrest. And then the most private I have here is your home, of course. Nobody can go into your home and protest. You just get them out, it's trespass. And again, military cases. Government property, no right to protest, and you will be shot, probably. Exceptions. So this is some of the nuance that I foreshadowed earlier. If you are protesting in any of the places I talked about and you are being excluded, you are being threatened with arrest based on the content of your speech, you have an argument that you have the right to protest there. What I mean in that example is that, for example, the Salvation Army is allowed to have free speech. They're allowed to ask for donations outside of a store, and then you go there with your animal rights literature and they have you arrested. So they're looking at the content of your speech, it's animal rights, and they are arresting you on that basis. So they're not allowed to if it's based on the content. Those content-based restrictions, they can only restrict your content if it's narrowly tailored. You have alternative channels, you have another way to get your speech out, you have another way to get your message out, and it serves a compelling need. And so, contrary to what I just said, they can exclude you based on the content of your speech if they can show that there is a certain situation where the government really needs for you not to be there. This is so rare, it's difficult to come up with a valid example. Maybe I'll come up with one later and give you an example. But the idea is ultimately that if they are restricting, here on the bottom I have 2 examples. If they're restricting all signs of a certain size, for example, they're not looking at the content of the sign. They're just saying if your sign is larger than 12 inches by 12 inches, they don't allow it. It doesn't matter what's on it, it just matters the size. So they don't care about the content. But there was a lawsuit where real estate signs were restricted outside of people's homes. They targeted real estate signs. How do you know it's a real estate sign? You look at the content. And so that was illegal. There was no lawful basis to restrict the real estate sign. So that city law that restricted real estate signs, it was presumed invalid unless they could show it was narrowly tailored, they had alternative channels, and it served a compelling government interest. And there were, in this particular case I'm thinking about, there was no real basis to reduce those real estate signs, and that law was kicked out. I wanted to mention as well heckler's veto. Has anybody heard of a heckler's veto before? You've heard of a heckler's veto. It was relevant in your case. All right. Heckler's veto is somebody else is complaining about it. So you get a bunch of animal activists together, and they're showing, they have a cube of truth, they have the TV mount on their chest, and you're showing video of horse abuse at horse track races. Somebody comes up and says, I don't like what you're showing, I don't want my child to see the horse abuse. You still have a right to display this content, but somebody else says, I don't like it. And that person then goes to the security guard, goes to the police, and the police say, I don't like what they're showing, and then the police threaten you with arrest. So that in that example, that woman is the heckler, and she's vetoing you by complaining to police about the content of your speech. So that's another example of what's not legal, right? We don't let other people of the public tell us what we're allowed to speak. For all property where you are allowed to speak, they can regulate your speech to what's called time, place, and manner. And that just means there's a balancing of interests. For time, they don't want you having protests during sleeping hours, right? You can't protest at 1 o'clock in the morning in a neighborhood. You know, maybe at noon, but at 1 o'clock in the morning you will be arrested. They can regulate your protest to a reasonable time. Another example is campus during classes. So there are protests that go on in school. If you do it outside of a class while the class is going on, they can remove you. Reasonable place. We have free speech zones, for example. They can put you in a free speech zone under certain circumstances. I'll talk about those later. They cannot, however, put you in a desert island, and so that means there are good places for a free speech zone where you can access people, and there are far away bad places. They cannot regulate your place to be so far that you cannot communicate with your intended audience. And a reasonable manner. So manners would be, again, something more physical. If they don't want you to hand out literature because they're concerned about litter, that is not a reasonable reason to say that you cannot use literature. If they want to tone down your noise, there are reasons why they can say you're too loud, or there are reasons they can't. And so again, any place that you protest, whether it's legal or not, they can regulate your time, place, and manner as long as it's reasonable. If you think it's not reasonable, you contact an attorney and we would look through it and say, yeah, this is okay, that's not okay, that's not okay. Another example I remember from here is that some shopping malls, I think in Long Beach, Pikes Peak, Pikes Corner, Pikes something in Long Beach, if you want to protest there, they will charge you a fee, and they will charge you an application for a permit. If it's a small application fee, it's probably lawful. If it's a big one, why is it big? Because they don't want you to protest there. They want to charge you $100. Not everybody wants to pay $100 every time they want to protest there. That adds up. So if it's an excessive fee, that's an unreasonable regulation. Again, I mentioned equal protection earlier out of the 14th Amendment. This is very important, and this is a good way for you to understand where you can and cannot protest. If somebody else is doing it there, you can do it there. Examples, are there vendors on site? Salvation Army, are they asking for money? That's free speech. You have free speech there as well. Girl Scouts, there was a farmer's market that had free speech tables, and the Girl Scouts were applicants. They were denied the permit to my client because of the content of her speech, but they gave it to the Girl Scouts. If they give it to Girl Scouts, they can give it to my client. Military recruiters, sometimes people had been to a rodeo where they had a PA system, and on the PA system they were talking about join the Army, join the Navy, join whatever. So here we have military free speech. Well, if they have military free speech there, they can have animal rights free speech. They open the door, you're allowed to walk through. And city services even. Back to that farmer's market example, there was a booth at the farmer's market which was maintained by the city. It was the City of Torrance Farmer's Market. So the City of Torrance had a booth there, and at their booth they had literature stands. This is what the city provides to you. That is the city's free speech. They do it, you can do it too. Amplified sound, this is a instance that I get time and time and time again. There's a case right now, we're litigating against the rodeo. The rodeo had a PA system. The rodeo had customers there who would have birthday parties. The birthday parties would bring speakers and birthday music. So when the protesters are there, the protesters can have amplified sound too. Equal protection. If you see somebody else doing it, you can do it too. How to avoid arrest. All right. So don't be an activist. Anytime you protest, there's a risk of arrest. Doesn't mean it is a lawful arrest, but there is a risk of arrest. And some people are so afraid of being arrested, they want there to be zero risk. The only way for zero is don't do it. You can follow every law and still get arrested. I have. So there are at least 2 ways to protest, or I'm sure there's more. If you want to minimize your risk of arrest, don't break the law. For a peaceful protest, generally the lowest risk, you obey all police orders. If police are telling you, like you're protesting here, police want you to protest there, go over there. Why not? The more you know the law, it helps, and don't sweat the small stuff. Again, if the cop is telling me to protest over there, and I know I have the right to protest in either place, it's a little deal, I'll just go over there, okay? Be agreeable with police. More militant protest, it's still a low risk because militant does not mean illegal. Militant just means you are rigid in what you are willing to do. You would obey lawful police orders. So the cop tells me to move over there, I'll tell him no, I'm allowed to protest here, and I'll continue my protest. Knowing the law definitely helps, and sweating the small stuff, again, that's up to you. But now that I am trained in the law, I don't like giving police the idea that they can just tell me what to do. Sometimes I will, who wants to fight with the police, but oftentimes I won't. Oh, this gentleman here, honk if you hate the IRS. What do you think about this guy? Is he soliciting somebody else to commit a crime? Or is that free speech? You're only allowed to use your horn if there's an emergency. You can't use it, you're not allowed to use it to honk at somebody if you're angry, for example. So this could be soliciting, he's asking other people to commit a crime, and he could be arrested. This has come down, of course, in favor of the protester. He's allowed to ask. It would be wrong, in theory, for the driver to honk the horn, because it's the driver who is not using his horn to communicate, but he's using his horn to make noise, not to communicate an emergency. And then just recently a case like this came down, and it said pretty much the exact, well, the way that the law should be. If you are using your horn to communicate, you're driving by protesters and you're in support. There's a free Hong Kong or a free, democracy for Hong Kong protest, and you're honking in support, you are honking to communicate an idea. And because you're honking to communicate an idea, it's protected. But, or even if you hate it, if you hate the idea, if it's Westboro Church, for example, when you're honking at them, you're still communicating an idea. But this is not protected speech if you are upset at somebody who's driving in front of you too slow or something. That is not protected speech, and you can be cited for that. Okay, I have an ode to Sergeant Hamill. I actually have a video of our good Sergeant Hamill. I guess I'll have it down here. So this is a real live protest and a real live police officer. This is why it's good to do this before. There we go. Okay, so I don't have audio here, and this really sucks without audio. Let me see if I can. Alright, let me see if I can figure this out. Anybody roll PC savvy? I'm a Macintosh person. Anybody roll PC savvy?
It might be in the bottom right corner. There's like 3 dots.
Can we go up? No.
No, it's not.
No. Well, we'll skip over this guy. So this cop comes here, harasses these protesters in the neighborhood, and he says pretty much everything wrong. What the protesters do correctly is they don't really engage with him. They say a word or two, and he's just here, he's trying to harass them, and they just mostly ignore him. And then eventually he walks away. That's unfortunate, it's not. I'll skip over this. Let's go back to our presentation. All right. So the point here is do not talk to police. Just don't. I'll give you a couple of exceptions, but don't talk to police. They're not your friends. Police are there typically to enforce the law. Enforcing the law is usually protecting the shop owners, protecting the people who are protesting. And the more you talk to police, the more ammunition that you give them to shut you down. So what you want to say is that you can remain silent or turn your back. And I wanted to bring Jerold up here as an example. All right, so Jerold, you're going to be a cop, first time, and you want to tell me like I can't be protesting. So I'm going to be here with my protest sign and tell me I'm not allowed to protest.
You're not allowed to protest here.
Okay. All you do is turn your back. We live in a police state. That's all. We live in a police state where we are taught to obey police, engage with police. You have no obligation to do that. And the simple example, you may want to practice yourself because we are so ingrained to listen to police. You may want to practice it. It is empowering because they are not your boss. If you're arrested, they're your boss. If you're not arrested, they're not. To turn your back on the authority figure shuts them down. This example came up at a demonstration in Los Angeles that was across the street. I was on the other side of the street across Wilshire. A police officer came over and started talking to a lawyer friend of mine saying, oh, hey, can I have your attention, please? I want to talk to you about whatever. And my lawyer friend, he just turns his back. And the cop, it is so indignant, the cop had to walk all the way around 180 degrees and started talking to my lawyer friend again. And my lawyer friend again just turned his back, and then the police officer just walked back across the street. You have no obligation to talk to police, ever. If you feel, for some reason, you must talk, that little optimistic child who says, police are our friends, if that child comes up in you, if you want to say something, you can say, I don't answer questions. If you feel you have to say something, if you want to dismiss them. Or talk to my attorney, but not no comment. You want to get the word attorney in there, lawyer in there. You could just say lawyer, as simple as that. The reason is if you say no comment, they can take from that an implication of guilt, maybe. Did you steal from that store? No comment. They can imply that you did. Did you steal from that store? I'm not going to talk to you about my attorney. They cannot imply that you did. And so we hear no comment a lot from people who don't know what they're talking about. We hear no comment a lot from TV shows. I hear it all the time on TV shows. Get the word lawyer in there. There was an episode of, I don't remember the TV series. There was an episode of a gang, Charlie Hunnam, what was the Sons of Anarchy? That was it. There was an episode of Sons of Anarchy where one of the members of the one of the members of the motorcycle gang was arrested, and the prosecutor was trying to talk to him. He said, like, tell me this, and the gang member just said, lawyer. Tell me this, tell me this, tell me this. Lawyers, that's all he said. Perfectly all right to do. Sometimes you may have a legal liaison. So for example, if somebody is educated in the law, you can always say to the cop, hey, talk to that person, he's the police liaison. All right? An exception here is when you're at home. So people say, well, do you mean not to talk to the police ever, ever, ever? In my view, if the context is political activism, don't talk to police ever, ever, ever. But if the FBI is knocking on my door and say, hey, there was a kidnapping, I'll talk to the FBI. All right? So there are some instances where you may want to. Or if you're the victim of a crime, you may want to talk to police in that context, right? But if it's political activism, the answer is never. Do not identify yourself or anybody else. Can you give me the names of all your friends here, right? Who's leading this group? Oh, he's the leader. Don't identify people. There is no law here that says that the police can stop and force you to identify yourself with the, I have the exception later on. So if you are stopped, if you're being detained, they're saying, hey, we think that you committed a crime. Identify yourself, show me your driver's license. Doesn't work in California. It works in other states, some other states. Nevada, for example, they can do that, but in California they can't. Only if you're arrested can they demand to see your driver's license, your identification. California, not unless you're arrested. Do not speak or listen on behalf of others. I've had instances where I've been at a protest, somebody comes up to me and says, hey, can you tell everybody, all of the other protesters, they're not allowed to do this. Say, you can talk to me. I'm not going to let you talk to me on behalf of everybody else. I'm not going to tell them. I don't know who these people are. And do not become isolated. Many times I've seen police or security or somebody say, hey, can you come over here and talk with us? Don't do that. You want to have your friends around you. Okay? Don't be isolated. Don't try to outsmart police. Anything that you say, no matter how insignificant, can be used against you. You cannot lie to police. You're not allowed to do it. That is an independent crime. You can be a completely lawful protester. You can give them a false name. You just committed a crime. Don't try to outsmart them. But they can lie to you, and police are allowed to lie to you. It's an imbalance in the law, but that's just the way the law is. So the best way you can guarantee you don't lie to police, don't talk to them. Your speech is an opportunity for them to find a reason to arrest you or somebody else, right? So you identify other people, they will ask other people questions, and they will build a case to say, hey, this person should be arrested. I want to make a comment on hearsay and admissions. So hearsay is pretty much a statement that's outside of court that you're presenting as true. It's kind of the definition. And so if you try to protect yourself at a demonstration and you say, I did not hit that person. You were trying to protect yourself. That statement goes out of court. It's hearsay. It's not allowed in. You don't help yourself by saying I didn't hit that person. You don't help yourself at all. But the flip side is if you admit to something, I did hit that person, that statement is still hearsay, right? I didn't hit that person, I did hit that person. Still hearsay. But because it is against your interest to admit that you hit somebody, it's an admission, and admissions are allowed in court. So when you try to protect yourself verbally, it doesn't protect you at all. But if you admit to something, it hurts you. This is another reason don't talk to police. You can't help yourself, you can't get yourself in a better position, but you can make it worse for you or somebody else. Okay, so when you can talk to police, when you should talk to police. You do not identify yourself, as I said earlier, unless you're going to produce your driver's license if you are operating a motor vehicle. And that is extremely important. There was a lady who was walking her dog. She got to her car, she sat in her car. Police came her and asked her for her identification. She was sitting in her car, she was not operating the car, and they had no right to demand her identification. But if you're driving and you're pulled over, you're operating the car, cops ask you for your license, that is the one exception to when they can ask you for your identification. And if you don't give that to them, then you're committing a crime. As I said earlier, if you're talking on a political, if there's a political context, don't talk to police. And then generally, if you're under arrest, you produce your identification. You go to jail. They can keep you as long as they need to identify who you are. And so it's a good idea to give them your identification so you don't stay in jail for a long time. I have one exception here. The law is all about exceptions. The one exception here is that there have been mass arrests. 20 people, probably not, 100 people, 200 people who have been arrested. And if you don't want to be identified, this is a good time not to be identified. This is a good time not to give your driver's license if you don't want to, because the chances of them keeping you and 200 people in the jail is pretty slim. They want to get you out of the jail. I knew one person in San Francisco who had warrants on him. He was part of a mass arrest. Nobody thought they would be arrested. He had warrants on him. They asked for his ID, he refused to give his ID, and we were all kicked out of jail, and you know, it was luck for him. But that would be an example when you don't identify yourself.
What about detained? I'm sorry, detained versus arrested. Is that the same if you're detained?
No, so if you're detained, detention essentially means they're investigating. They think there was a crime, they're not sure, and they're holding you because they're investigating the crime. You don't have to identify yourself in California if you're detained. Only if you're arrested. Only if you have the handcuffs put on you. Only if you're put in the police car and being taken to jail. All right, I touch on that a little later. You can ask if you're free to leave. So the concept is, okay, you can ask if you're free to leave, and they will tell you, yes, you're free to leave, you leave. If they say no, it means you're being detained and you stay there, all right? But whether you stay there or not, if they are asking you questions to get somebody else in trouble, another activist in trouble, why would you want to talk with them? You have no obligation to talk with them. Why would you want to help the police harass another activist? Or if they're investigating yourself, you have that Fifth Amendment right not to talk. Why would you want to talk to the police and help them build a case against you? And so in either case, you can ask if you're free to leave, and if they say yes, then leave. If not, you stay there and you stay quiet. There is an unusual law, it's called misprison. It probably won't apply in an animal rights context, but I wanted to let you know about this law. This is a time that you are actually obligated to talk to the police. It's defined differently in every state, but for example, in California, if you know of violence or particularly sexual violence against children, you have the responsibility to report that to the police. And this is a time when you must. I have never heard of anybody being prosecuted for misprison, but it's on the books. So if they can prove that you knew about child abuse and you didn't tell the police, you could be arrested for that. So that's an example of when you are required to talk to police. I have here non-citizen issues. I'm not an immigration attorney. If you are not a US citizen, you should talk to an immigration attorney, and they will tell you when to talk to police or when not to talk to police. I won't tell you that. And otherwise, protest. Don't engage with police or security. I have seen so many videos of activists thinking they can outsmart police, thinking they can talk police out of harassing them. But as I gave the example of Juvel here, I turned my back. I'm here to protest. I'm not here to talk to police or talk to security. They will burn up your time, make you less effective at advocacy if you start arguing about details. So, protest. A mention on undercovers and infiltrators. This guy, Paul McComb, does anybody know him, know his story? He was hired by SeaWorld and he infiltrated, I don't remember which group, some PETA affiliate or some PETA wannabe group in the Los Angeles area, and you can see him protesting against SeaWorld. He became friends with a bunch of people, and then eventually there was a Rose Bowl parade with the floats. A bunch of people were arrested. They went to the SeaWorld float and they were harassing the SeaWorld float. A bunch of people were arrested. This guy got out of jail very quickly. And people were like, how did you get out so quickly? He was undercover, and that is what triggered his story to start unraveling. So why is this important? It doesn't matter to me personally if there are infiltrators and agitators and so forth. These are three individuals. I'm not familiar with the guy on the left. He's British, UK, and he infiltrated various hunt saboteur groups. This person in the middle, Robin, was a friend of mine, but she worked for a corporation. This guy on the right, I was at the Minnesota DNC convention some years ago, and he was out protesting. He represented himself as an anarchist, and he was agitating and stirring the crowd up, and we think that he was trying to justify the police arresting everybody. So there are people like this, but in my view, I thought I had another slide in here, maybe it's later on. In my view, just if there's somebody who is trying to get you to commit a crime, if there's somebody who's trying to get you to do something you're not comfortable with, just don't do it. Just keep them out of your sphere, just ignore them. In my view, any one of you could be a police infiltrator, any of you. I don't care, because I'm not saying anything illegal here. I'm not telling you to do anything illegal. If I go to a protest, there's 10 people there, it's me and 9 cops. Hey, we got 10 protesters. It's totally fine. It's the point where they tell me, hey, Jerry, let's do something illegal, and then they try to get me arrested and go to prison. That's the issue. So that's the only issue. All right. Where to stand? I mentioned parks, sidewalks, and streets. So this is the safest place. Here we have a sidewalk, we have a public street. Safest place to protest is always the parks, sidewalks, and streets. They can be regulated time, place, and manner, as I said before. If you have any concerns about that, talk to a lawyer. I did say streets. That does not mean that you're allowed to go into traffic and block it. What it means is you can go to the city government and say, hey, we are going to have 500 demonstrators. We need a permit to block off this sidewalk so we can have 500 demonstrators, and the city will issue you a permit. So you have the right to be there. The city will facilitate it, but don't get hit by traffic. Handing literature to drivers is a common issue here on the sidewalk. You cannot initiate the contact. You step in the street and say, here, have literature. That is you committing a crime by going into the street. It's essentially jaywalking. However, a driver can stop and say, hey, give me some literature, and then you can do it, okay? So you don't want to start that contact. You can hand your literature out, but stay on the sidewalk. It's when you go into the street and you're stopping traffic, you're interfering with traffic, that's the problem. What is blocking the sidewalk? So blocking is an intentional and malicious blocking of somebody on the sidewalk. So Jerold, if I can bring you up here again for demonstration. Super easy, all you need to do is stand. Okay, so if I'm going down the sidewalk and I have to move myself around, Jerold, she's not blocking, she's just standing there. Okay, now act like you're handing out literature. Okay, the same thing. She's got her arms extended, she is not blocking. She is not maliciously blocking me. She just happens to stand there. Okay, and the final demonstration, like in basketball, is I walk by you, try to prevent. Okay, so I'm walking here. Okay, this is blocking. This is illegal. But thank you. If you're standing there, police will tell you you're blocking, and that's not the case. Police may tell you you have to walk in a circle, because in theory, if you're walking in a circle, you're not blocking anybody. That's not true. You don't have to walk in a circle. You don't have to walk at all. It's just you're not intentionally, maliciously blocking. Residential protests, civil versus criminal. If you go to a protest at a house and you are standing on their front lawn, that is a civil trespass. What that means is that the homeowner is allowed to make you stop. The homeowner says, get off my grass. So you get off their grass. If you stay on the grass after you've been given notice, if you stay on the property after you've been given notice, if there is a fence, that fence is notice that this is private property. After you cross over the fence, that is when it becomes criminal. And so I have been at protests where the line between public property, the sidewalk, and the property is a little unclear. There's a line here, is that the difference or not? I don't know. And somebody will put their foot and straddle the line. Or as you're just kind of shifting your weight, you might be on the person's property. Police show up, they cannot arrest you because you're standing on the property until the point where you're told to get off the property. So then you get off, right? If you refuse to get off, that's the crime. Public forum equivalent, I mentioned this a little bit earlier. Property that is open to the public, that is akin to town square. It doesn't even have to be akin to town square, where no invitation or admission ticket is required. So this is most venues where you are allowed to protest. It's not a sidewalk, it is not a park, it is not a street, but it is land that is open to the public. And I'm remembering, well, this would be like a city-owned farmer's market. There was in Long Beach, I think last year, there was a city-sponsored, like a city took over a parking lot, or maybe it was a city-owned parking lot, and they had all sorts of vendors there, and the police were telling the activists they couldn't go in there because it was private property or something. But this venue, this food music festival, it was open to the public, and it's kind of like a town square because you have all these different vendors and you're allowed to go there. So, I don't know, again, it's like kind of, if you have any questions about police telling you where you can and can't protest, just talk to a lawyer. Talk to a civil rights lawyer, because other lawyers who don't know this stuff, they might give you the wrong answer. There are interference with business issues, which really comes down to obstruction and intimidation. So the law says that if you're interfering with a business, like you are boycotting, you're telling people to boycott a certain store, you're interfering with them. You want to drive their customers away. You don't want them to make any money. That's interference. It's lawful, unless you obstruct or intimidate. Obstruction is, again, physical, just like I had here with Jerold. If you are, I had a client who stood in line at a circus, stood in the ticket line. When she got to the front of the ticket line, she started arguing with the ticket salesperson. She was physically obstructing the people behind her from going through. Physical obstruction is an issue. You can be arrested for that, interference, okay? And then intimidation, everybody feels intimidated. Oh my gosh, there are these protesters there. They say I shouldn't club baby seals. I'm intimidated. So the law doesn't recognize something like that. Intimidation means there is some form of a threat that makes you change your mind. So if I have a don't club baby seals, I tell people, if you pass this line, I'm gonna club you. That's intimidation, all right? But if I'm standing there and I'm screaming and people think I'm intimidating, that's their problem. If they go to the venue anyway, they're not intimidated. I mentioned this before, if the property is available to other free speakers. There have been venues at parks where there is a section of a park, for example, that is for a community theater, and then whatever event comes up and they have people talking, you can talk to. So again, it's equal protection, but I've already covered that. Okay, this is the all-encompassing property example. So going from outside the street, there's the little islands, you have no right to protest there. I've seen people go there and hand out literature. You have no legal right to do it. If police want to do something about it, they can arrest you. You can protest in the street with a permit. You can protest on the sidewalk. I have an asterisk talking about pedestrian easements. So what if there is no sidewalk? What if the road comes right up against the property? Broadly speaking, you have 3 feet on that road where you can protest. So the 3 feet, not on the property side, but the 3 feet on the street side, you can protest in those 3 feet. Now, the assumption in this diagram is that the grass is on private property. It's not the sidewalk, so I would not protest there. In California, you probably have the right to protest there, but technically that's private property, I would avoid it. You have the right to protest in a parking lot as long as it's safe, okay? Don't block cars, don't get yourself hit, don't get somebody else hit. If it's safe, you can go through there. An animal activist actually brought a case like this and made this law clear, which is wonderful. The same thing on the internal grass. You probably have the right to protest in the internal grass, but I would avoid it unless you talk to an attorney and be clear. Normally your protest is going to be here in the internal walkways. In California, this is lawful. Again, as long as there's no safety issues. How do you know if there's a safety issue? You can look at a history. If there's a history of safety issues there, if there's going to be a lot of people there, but they can't just say, oh, there's a safety issue, and just use that as a pretext to deny it, okay? It has to be genuine. We have free speech zones. There are a lot of cases that point to free speech zones are okay, again, for safety issues. So if there's a high population, if there are thousands of people coming to this event, and their concern is, well, what if there's a bomb that goes off and people have to run? They can put you in a free speech zone to keep your, when you're handing literature out and you're extending, you're making an obstacle, and so they can do that for safety issues. They cannot discriminate against you if your behavior is pretty much the same as everybody else. If there's 1,000 people here and you're just walking through here talking to people, anybody can walk through there and talk to people, right? They have to treat you like everybody else. But if you're walking through here extending your hand out and saying, here, take literature, or if you say, I'm Hare Krishna, I'm the Salvation Army, give me money, okay? Because this extension of the arm, they say that's a genuine public safety issue in high populations, and they can put you in a free speech zone. Another example of a free speech zone would be if there's counter-protesters, right? There are the vegans and the hunters who are protesting at the same event, or one side is for, one side is against. The police can say, hey, you vegans, you go there, you hunters, you go there, because you are, you're going to be explosive if you get too close together. They can do free speech zones for safety, but it has to be real. It has to be real safety. I've got a case right now at a rodeo where we have a document from the sheriffs, and they say that there have been protests here for the last 5 years. There's never been an issue, but they put up a free speech zone, and we're saying that free speech zone was illegal because there hasn't been an issue for 5 years. What is the safety concern? When you get to the ticket booth, you can protest up to that point of the ticket booth, but don't block business, as I said before. Don't stand in line, don't maliciously block people. You can go to the ticket booth, you cannot go past the ticket booth. When you go to a ticket booth and they give you a ticket, that ticket is permission to go beyond here, and that ticket, that permission can be revoked. So you could buy a ticket, you could then take that ticket here and start to protest, but they will revoke that permission because you're protesting there and you have to leave. That would be a lawful example of when you could do that. It's not gonna, I mean, you make the decision, but from my view, you're giving them money, it's a rodeo or whatever, you're giving them money, and you're gonna be in here for 2 minutes. Like, what's the point? But you can go up to that point. You can stand next to the admission gate. If the admission is right there, I can stand up to the admission gate with my sign, people can walk by. I can't block the business. Okay. This is a stadium in Houston, Texas, where I live. And this just repeats what I had above. You can protest in the parking lot. These are ticket booths. You can protest anywhere outside of this fence. You can protest there on the sidewalk. All of this space is pretty much open for protest unless there's a safety issue. I added a slide here on gathering evidence. I have won more cases based on a single video clip than anything else. Video is wonderful. Ever since Rodney came, just video, video, video. When you take video, it helps a great deal. If you're taking the video, at the start of the video, no, I'm already jumping down to number 3. At the start of the video, you say your name. Hey, this is Jerry Friedman, I'm making a recording. It is this date, it is this time, and this is the location I'm at. OE is a prolific videographer. I have 200 videos of his on a certain case, and sometimes it's like, wait, which video came first, which video came second? I had a case where we looked at the metadata where the video said that it was created on a certain date, and that metadata was wrong because the file had been copied from one disk to another disk, and that metadata was changed. And so we alleged something happened on a certain day. The other side immediately said, well, this person was on vacation that day, so it couldn't have been her, or something to that effect. So if you remember at the start of your video, who is the videographer? We want to know who shot the video, date, time, location. Very helpful. And again, I talked about demeanor. I'll go up to your own narrative taken soon after the incident. If you go to a protest and you saw somebody arrested, you don't have a picture, you don't have a camera, you don't have a video, but you saw something. If you take notes close to the time when it happened, it's considered to be inherently reliable because it's close in time. And so if I, again, I'll use OE as my example, if I saw OE get arrested and I go home and I write notes, this is what I saw, that is going to be very valuable. If I wait a week, a month, a year, my memory is not going to be as good. So if you don't have a video camera, take your own narrative. And then above, another thing that's very helpful is to take witness names, contact information. If there was something that happened at a protest, somebody was arrested or whatever it is, get people's names in the area, people who have seen it. It is common practice that police will do this, and police will try to find witnesses who are against the bad person. And in this case, it's okay if you try to find people who you think are in favor of the bad person, in quotes. It's just the way that it goes. But anyway, that's your judgment. I want to go through some laws that are commonly used to harass protesters. You are allowed to wear masks if you want to, but not to commit a crime. If you go to 7-Eleven with a mask on and you rob the place, you have two crimes: robbing the place and wearing a mask while you're robbing the place. But if you go to a protest, you can wear a mask. Halloween, knock door to door, you can wear a mask. Wearing a mask is legal unless you're using it to conceal your identity during a crime. You can stand still, just don't block anybody. You can use obscenities, but don't if you think there might be a lawsuit. You can give legal advice. Anybody here? A cop is talking to Juvel, and what's your name?
Shia.
Shia, you tell Juvel, shut up. And the cop says, are you a lawyer? Are you giving her legal advice? You can tell her to shut up. That's no problem. The problem where you get in trouble with legal advice is if you pretend to be a lawyer, and that means I'm going to say, hey, come over here, let's have a private conversation, let's go into my office, tell me your secrets, what happened. If I'm representing myself as a lawyer, that's a problem. But if you're giving legal advice, you're allowed to do that. Of course, if you don't know the law, I hope you don't give legal advice because you could hurt somebody. Yeah, you should talk to that cop. All right. You can film police, and please do. I would rather have 100 hours of video where only 5 minutes is important than to have nothing and lose those 5 minutes. So please film. Unlawful gathering and failure to disperse. I would not normally expect this in an animal rights context. Going back to the Long Beach anarchist protest in May 2001, there were hundreds of people, and the police shut down, said that there were, I guess there was some vandalism and there were some threats of violence, and the police said you all have to leave. And so if you hear an order to leave, it's a good idea to leave unless you want to risk arrest. You would it's only an unlawful gathering after the police announce it is, and then you would be arrested for failure to disperse. Usually they'll give you several warnings, and then if you're still there, they'll arrest everyone. There's a lot of other legal issues on, this is considered either a riot or a rout. There's a lot of other legal issues I'm not going to go into, but there are a lot of amplified sound laws that are, in my opinion, targeting protesters. Amplified sound is a very rich area of law. I don't think I could give you an example for every instance, but again, if you want to use a megaphone at a park and it says don't use megaphones at parks, talk to a lawyer, talk to a civil rights lawyer, and you can talk about those details in more. You can talk about that in more detail. And contraband and medication is a big issue. There was a lawyer who had gone to a nuclear power protest, and she had medication with her, but the medication was not marked. It was just pills in a plastic bag. And so when she was arrested, they're all, oh, pills in a plastic bag. And then she was kept in jail longer for them to find out that it was not narcotics. So if you have medication you need to take, like put it in your prescription bottle or put it in a way that it's clear to police that it's not narcotics. A lot of drugs will have stamps on it. It'll say aspirin or something, so that helps. But just be conscientious about that. If you're arrested and they find something on you, if they find a Swiss Army knife or some other knife or something else, they can use that to keep you longer. Just be aware. Every city has its own set of laws. I have this example from the Los Angeles Municipal Code, which is the intention of this law is to prevent there from being weapons at protests and pickets. And so it says essentially that you cannot take a club to a protest, put a sign on the club, and then later on you're going to hit people with it. So if intend for a protest at a certain city, it's a good idea to check the city laws. And again, if you need help, talk to a civil rights attorney if you need help navigating that. But this is a fairly unusual law, and so I can imagine any number of you putting a sign on a stick and you're just there to hold the stick, and then you could be arrested because of that wood. For militant picketing issues, I advise people to stay 4 to 6 feet away. So I'm about 6 feet tall, so if I was laying down, that's how far away I want to be from somebody. The reason is personal space. If I get too close to somebody might think that I'm coming in here to punch them. This person might think I'm coming in there to punch them and he punches me back. So you want to keep a distance from people you're talking to make sure that there's no observation of violence or threat of violence, or that it can be used as an excuse. Police don't like you. They said, hey, you were right in that person's space. That person was going to hit you. I'm going to arrest you for inciting violence. So keep your distance. Obey all parking and traffic laws. Police love this. There was a protest at Farmer John in the city of Vernon, which I understand shut down. But back when it wasn't shut down, there was a big protest there. A bunch of people from Utah came down. And as they were driving away after the protest, he went over the stop line and he got a ticket for going over the stop, not making a full and complete stop. Wear your seatbelt. I've known of activists getting ticketed for seatbelts. I've known of activists getting ticketed for parking meter violations. I have on video a sergeant telling the police to ticket all the cars, and the police went and looked at every car, and any car that was exceeding the time limit, they got a ticket for. So police will use things like this to harass you. Not the worst thing in the world, but who likes it? Detention, ever so briefly on detention. A detention is for investigation. They think you committed a crime, but they're not sure. So they can hold you, you're not under arrest, they can hold you, you're not free to leave until their investigation is over. It can only be for a reasonable amount of time. You can always, and you should always, not consent to searches. If you have a purse, police say, can I search your purse? No, I do not give consent. You have a backpack, I do not give consent. They want to put their hands in your pockets, I do not give consent. They can open these if they have reason to believe that you have contraband, usually drugs of course, or if you have a weapon. So if you have a bulge in your pocket, that could be a gun, it could be a knife, they can search your pocket with or without your permission. But if they ever ask your permission, the answer is always no. No, do not consent. Car stops and searches, this isn't really much of an activist issue, but the same thing. If you're stopped driving your car, they want to search your car, it's the same idea. I do not give consent. That's really the basic. An arrest is when they believe that you committed a crime. You should have a legal phone number written on your skin if you think there's a risk of arrest. Jerry Friedman, this number, or just the number. You can't guarantee that your pockets aren't going to be emptied. If you have an attorney's number on a piece of paper, you could lose that piece of paper. Have it written on your skin. Do not talk ever except to identify yourself, and then of course the answer is talk to my attorney, lawyer, anything of the sort. Big issue here is do not resist arrest. You might think that it's absurd. I know I wasn't breaking the law, and they arrested me anyway. And you resist, you struggle, you fall down. Don't resist arrest. I'll have a caveat there of passive resistance. This is something that was big with Gandhi. They would have mass sit-ins, and the police would come, and the people would passively resist. They would just flop on the ground. Operation Rescue would do this. They would go out outside of abortion centers. There was one case in El Paso where all the anti-abortion activists just flopped on the ground in the fetal position, and they were pretending to be the unborn babies. So there may be reasons for passive resistance, but do it deliberately. Don't do it just to punish the police. Do it because there is a point to it. So you may want to resist only in this passive example where you're not struggling with them. It's just you're using your weight as resistance. Do not sign suspicious paperwork. I was arrested at Knott's Berry Farm many years ago at a protest, not for being belligerent. Maybe I was belligerent, but that wasn't why I was arrested. And when we were brought to the police station, the arresting officer brought each of us who were arrested individually into like a closet interrogation something, and he wanted me to sign some paperwork. I never read the paperwork, don't have any idea what it said, doesn't matter to me, I'm not signing that. I tell you, one of my regrets in life is I kind of go back to that time and I wish I had drawn a dolphin. We were protesting for dolphins. I wish I had drawn a dolphin with a signature, further protest, but if only I thought about it back then. I was going to review good old Sergeant Hamill. Well, here we are. We're at the Q&A. All right, so I've been very, very verbal. I hope I've gone over all the issues. Does anybody have any questions? Please, and would you, well, we don't have to identify ourselves. Give your real name or fake name, if you don't want to be identified.
Oh, me or him? Oh, me?
Yeah,
Yeah.
ladies
Hi,
first.
Christina.
Hi, Christina.
Hi. I just had a quick question about that city law about the restriction on use of wood.
Sticks, yeah, Los Angeles.
Are they interpreting it broader than that? I mean, if it's just wood, I mean, you can bring a hard rubber stick. Would
There is, in that law, as I recall, there is one subsection for wooden sticks, one subsection for metal sticks, and that was it. So if you have a rubber stick,
okay.
I mean, you look at the law. Christine, you're an attorney, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you should.
Yeah, I'm just saying how broadly they've been.
You have to check the law. As I remember it, there's one for wood, one for metal.
Okay. All right.
And then,
Yeah, hello, my name's Eric. My question is regarding, I believe you said there's a limitation for 12 by 12 signs? Is
that was an example.
Okay. My question is, in the case where maybe police try to prevent you from having like a larger sign, can you have multiple 12 by 12 signs that kind of form one visual, like if put together?
I would say yes to that. It is something that you would want to see the actual restriction the way it is worded, and then determine what the intent of that law is, and etc. So we have a sign restriction in the city of Los Angeles under certain circumstances, and I believe it says that your sign can only be the size of a sheet of paper. Okay, and that's ridiculous to hold a sheet of paper up and to communicate a message. And so one way around that might be to have several sheets of paper. You can hold out two. Your buddy can hold out two, their buddy can hold out two, and you can have a string of 8.5 by 11. So the question then becomes, is that illegal? And then the analysis is, why do they have that restriction there? Do they have the size restriction because maybe there's some city services, there are some buses, and you don't want to block the view for people trying to find the buses? Do they have that restriction there because they're harassing you? And so you'd want to navigate the why, what's going on, and then that would help you answer the question. The whole idea, again, is that you have the right to protest. The Bill of Rights comes above other laws. And so if a law like maximum size is there to prevent you from communicating, it is almost definitely illegal. But if that law is there because, again, the city is concerned that old people aren't going to see where the bus stop is because your sign is too big, that's probably legal. So that's the question. Other questions?
Hi, my name is Jose. You've helped me in the past, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
My question, and I know you say that it's very nuanced, so I understand that regarding like public and private. So where I live in Fresno, there's several like outdoor shopping centers, and it's not like the Santa Monica Promenade where it's like an actual city street, but it's what I believed, and I looked it up, I thought that they were privately owned outdoor shopping centers or leased. And so I've been like trespassed from 2 of them before, because I just walked with signs. I didn't even say anything. I wasn't handing anything out. I was just walking with the signs. But it was kind of like an unofficial, and the police never came. It was just security saying police are on the way, they're gonna come, and I knew they wouldn't. But I'm just curious, like places like that, and I guess, I don't know if it's different for like any outdoor shopping mall. I feel like there are a lot of places where I could go, but it's like in a private business park, it's not up against a sidewalk. So like it doesn't abut to a sidewalk, or if I'm on a public street. Like I have to go into the lot which leads into a business, and I feel like at least what they've told me is like, you can't do that, you can't be here. And
Security's gonna lie to you.
yeah, of
They
course.
have their employer. Police are probably gonna lie to you. They have their employer. All right. What I said earlier is throw out the whole notion of public versus private.
Okay.
That is, sometimes it's important in the analysis, but it's not front and center. It's secondary. In California, other states, private property owners have more rights than in California. So what you should have in mind is there's a town square. What is a town square? It's a bunch of shops. If this location has a bunch of shops, without knowing the location you're talking about, I'm almost sure you have the right to protest there. The difference is going to be is if there's a grocery store, like a Ralph's grocery store, or Trader Joe's, they've been involved in these types of cases. You have one store and a vast parking lot. This is not similar to a town square where you have a bunch of shops. And so because it is one isolated store, you have fewer rights to protest than if it was a strip mall or a shopping mall. And so whatever venue you're thinking about, if it's like in town square, where you have a lot of shops, you have a lot of rights to protest them. Everything in law has an exception. One of the big exceptions is that there are some private businesses where there is a single business, but the land that they occupy is so vast that again, the California government lets you protest there. The big case in California is Six Flags Magic Mountain. It's one business, but because this land is so vast, there was a case and said that you can protest there. I don't have the diagram here, but you can protest in the inner sidewalks in the parking lot. So Trader Joe's, kind of small, 100 people there at a time maybe, if they're lucky. Single store, small parking lot, right? But if you have a large property, you have the right. There was a case at the Santa Anita racetrack that we were litigating right before the Six Flags Magic Mountain case came through. We were pretty much done with the lawsuit when that case came through. And had that case come through earlier, I think we would have ended the Santa Anita lawsuit much better. But it's just that idea. If you have a large property, a lot of people going there, a public event, then you have more rights. And if it's a isolated store, you have fewer rights.
What if
Yeah.
you are
What's your name?
holding, Rose, sorry.
Rose?
Rose Beamer, happy to put my name anywhere.
Right.
What if you are protesting with a QR code? So it doesn't expressly state
I
that
have
you
not
are.
seen a case like that.
Great, okay.
In such a case, the fundamental question is, are you trying to communicate a political, social, religious, economic idea? Ethical. For me, that's the rubric of political, but ethical. Are you trying to communicate an idea where the First Amendment comes in to protect your ideas? Okay. So if you have that QR code, are you selling a product? Selling a product is protected speech, but it's a lower rung than political, ethical speech. So I haven't seen a case like that. It's an interesting issue. If my assumption, I'm just talking out loud, my assumption is if there's no other context, you're there with a sign and a QR code, I don't think you're going to have a right as a First Amendment. Around that QR code, you might want to have some, scan this to learn your rights. Have some kind of message there and then have a QR code. So for me as a lawyer, I would want to tell the judge, well, Your Honor, it's more than just a QR code. She also had a message on that sign and they were restricting the message and the QR code. Any other questions?
So, yeah, I mean, I'm not expert in constitutional,
You will be.
aspect, but I just have sort of this is almost sort of a funny question, is that, I mean, a lot of animal rights activists, including myself, I mean, I'm wearing shirts, This is my way of protest on an everyday level. So I think it's funny, here I am on private property, and in my mind, I'm literally, protesting. So when does signage, so this is my sign. So the difference between that and literally holding another apparel or another piece of fabric that says something, how would you analyze
So
that?
this is what lawyers do. We look for those exceptions. It's like, wait, I've got a sign on my shirt, right? And they're going to kick me out because of my shirt. I don't see that as significantly different. But what is valuable there is that if other people are wearing shirts with sports teams, other people are wearing shirts with their own free speech, and they tell you to leave because of your shirt, that tells me that they're violating equal protection. And because they're violating equal protection, they're violating your right to speech. Now, if there's a venue, I don't know one, but if there's a venue and it says, hey, if you have a sports team on your shirt, you're out. If you have an animal rights message on your shirt, you're out. If they apply the law equally, that's fine. They can do that. But if they target you because of your animal rights message, that's what the problem is. The corollary to that is public safety. Is it crowded? Is your sign going to represent some kind of a visual obstruction, a physical obstruction? They might try to use something like that. Probably not, because they wouldn't do that with a shirt. Of course, everybody's wearing shirts. So
Because I almost feel like, you know, if we had 30 of us wearing all our animal rights shirts and we sit in the lobby in the hotel, I think that's a really peaceful way to like make that statement. I mean, or scattered around.
So under that fact scenario, the hotel asks you to leave. You've got coordinated shirts. They're looking at the content, but they let other people sit on the couch who also have a political message, you know, go Rams or Louis Vuitton or whatever. I think that's a violation.
Yeah.
The question there too is that because you're in the lobby of a hotel, it's not a traditional public forum, and so there's going to be other laws in play.
Yeah.
So you have to analyze the property. Where are you allowed to be there with that message? So another example is going to be different restaurants. People do disruptions. I'm glad I brought this up. I wanted to bring this up here. A lot of people want to do disruptions inside of a grocery store, inside of a restaurant. Okay, you don't have a right to protest inside of a grocery store or a restaurant. But if you're there dining with a message shirt and you're kicked out, they may violate some law in California for kicking you out because of the message. I've worn a ton of animal rights t-shirts in restaurants, never been kicked out. But at the same time, I go to vegan restaurants. So.
Just very small. I mean, like literally, some of my signs I've like put on a shoelace and like wear around me and I mean, is that like, is this just such fine lines that would have to be exceptions, or what?
I look the land you're on. Are you on the sidewalk? Are you inside the mayor's office?
Okay.
I look at, are they looking at the content of your message?
Like, could I go into a restaurant and have a sign around my neck that is the shape of my body? You know, it's not like 20 feet, but it's this size, and eat and dine there.
I would reason if you're going inside of a restaurant with any kind of a sign, and you're there as a customer, they can't discriminate against you.
Mm.
If you're there as a protester, they can.
Well, if we get 50 people, like she was saying, to do that, we're not disrupting anything. I mean, we're other than our signage, but we are not physically.
So property owners, this is again specific to California. They can discriminate. They cannot discriminate you for a bad reason, which is your skin color, your religion. They're not allowed to do that. But they can discriminate against you for either a good reason, you're causing a ruckus, and they can discriminate against you for no reason. I don't like your glasses. Okay. Well, even that might be a problem because that might indicate a disability. So scratch that, right? I don't like the length of your hair, as long as it's not a racial thing. Okay. So the question to me is, again, the restaurant in this case, why are they kicking you out? Are they kicking you out because you're black or Asian or a woman, or because you look like a foreigner or something like that? That's a bad reason they can't do that. Are they kicking you out for no reason? Sir, we're just asking you to leave. Why? We're just asking you to leave.
I mean, I assume they would say like your shirt is offending people, or people have complained, because I've been told before that people are complaining about it.
It's private property.
Yeah, no, I get it.
So for private property, they have a lot of rights.
Okay.
They can't discriminate against you for a bad reason.
Yeah.
They have a lot of rights. So further on that thought of disruptions, I hear about a lot of disruptions. Hey, let's go disrupt Trader Joe. Please, if you ever participate in anything like this, change the name. It's not a disruption, because when you get arrested, you go to trial, they say, did you plan a disruption? You said yes. And I say, look at this literature. It also says there's a disruption. They said, come to the disruption at Trader Joe's. And then you look at the law and it says that it's illegal to disrupt a business. You just gave them that word, okay? So if you want to go to a restaurant and disrupt, I ask that you don't, but if you want to do that, call it merrymaking. I'm going to go to the restaurant for merrymaking. Don't use the word disruption. So,
Maybe.
Hey, I'm Sally. Thank you for your presentation.
sure.
I have a question about the noise threshold. There's a protest where it seems like all the protesters are standing back from the ticket line with their megaphones. And I don't have a megaphone, but I'm a singer, and there's a range in my voice that is so annoying and loud. And I was able to stand right there, and nobody said anything. And so, but I know it was higher than 85 decibels, and people in line were just visibly shaken, which is awesome. But I just wonder, could I have stood there that long if I had a megaphone? Is it actually a decibel, or is it just not using a machine?
So the California law says you cannot use excessive and unreasonable, I think are the elements, excessive and unreasonable. Doesn't matter if it's a machine or not, if it's excessive and unreasonable. If you are communicating a message, you're not just screaming, but if you're communicating a message, don't give this business your money, don't abuse animals, whatever. If you're giving a message, you're going to have more protection. From what I've seen, if it's human voice, you get more protection, but if it's excessive and unreasonable, you can be arrested. Normally, I would expect police to say, bring it down. Okay. I don't think that the law requires them to tell you to bring it down, but normally I would expect them to do that.
It was chanting.
The chanting, however it is.
Yeah.
And then otherwise you need to look at the city law. And so, for example, in Fresno, there is a decibel limit. In Los Angeles, I don't think there's a decibel limit for amplified sound. And so how do you get a decibel limit? You have to have a decibel reader, it has to be calibrated, etc. So you have to check the city law. Some cities will say don't use amplified sound in the park. Some cities will say don't use amplified sound in the park over a certain amount of noise. But that wouldn't apply in your situation because you don't have amplified sound. So the standard for California is loud, unreasonably loud and excessive, I think.
But then you said a city law or a
Yeah, city law can further limit.
Oh, further.
Well, there's a bunch of questions. Now that everyone's had the chance, I'm going to go ahead with a bunch of questions.
We got one question here,
Oh,
then we're going to go to the bunch.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Your name?
Yeah, Stas. So earlier you said that it's illegal to lie to the police, and earlier than that you said it was legal to give a false opinion. So not that I would do this because I would know better, but let's say that someone was at a protest and the police asked them who's the leader, and that person says, it is my opinion, that person way over there is the leader. Is that illegal?
If it's opinion, it's fine. They can't get you for opinion.
Okay, so like
If you preface it,
by saying like, it's my opinion.
my opinion, yeah.
Okay.
My opinion, that guy's the leader, that's right.
Okay.
Okay.
Um,
Now later on, of course, they could say, you know that guy, you're all arrested, you know that guy, and then you know that somebody else was the leader, and then you misidentified. So that could be a problem. But that gets a lot more nuanced.
okay.
It's better to say, who's the leader, and you just turn your back.
Yeah, gotcha. That was just a
Yep.
question. I didn't know what was lying. and
It's
what
okay,
wasn't.
in every class, you always have somebody.
Yeah. And when you were talking about the picture of like where it's illegal to protest, you said it was fine to protest 3 feet into the street side, like from the sidewalk.
If there's no sidewalk
Okay.
from the private property, 3 feet is safe.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay, if there's a sidewalk, it's the sidewalk. If there's no sidewalk in the street, 3 feet from the private property. You also have the right to walk 3 feet into the private property, but you can't protest 3 feet. So if the property line is right down the middle, on the street side, you can protest those 3 feet. On the property side, you can walk those 3 feet, but you cannot protest on the property side.
Oh, I'm sorry, are you ready to? You mentioned before about sweating the small stuff, not sweating the small stuff, that's up to you. But there have been times when like the property line is so ambiguous or cops will just say, this is where the line is, like you can't go over there. is it just up to you to say like, well, show me the property line? I got into it with the local zoo because they're within a public park, but their entrance, like I was trying to determine where I could go, and they have vendors near the entrance selling cotton candy and chips, but they told me I had to go in the park, and they kept moving the line of where that is, and so I'm trying to determine like when you get into that with them, like, and then it was like the weekend, so they're like, well, the person who runs that isn't here.
If you don't know, then you're gonna risk arrest.
If I don't know.
If you don't know,
Okay.
you're gonna risk arrest, especially if you're wrong. You might risk arrest anyway.
Well, how should I know? How should I go into that knowing?
So if you know you're gonna protest someplace, then you can research the county records.
Okay.
There should be county records. You can do public information requests, or you can talk to an attorney.
Okay.
And say, you know, Mr. Attorney, I want to protest here. Can you give me advice on where I can and can't? So if you don't know, you're risking arrest. Are we?
The people may need to know about the passive resistance and pain compliance, how much police are allowed to use.
Broadly speaking, this goes like you're talking about pain compliance. I didn't tell you on that first slide, which actually addresses that. On that first slide, there was the cop, if you remember. Let me jump to the front. Show there's a faster way to do that. Or not. Okay. Okay, good. All right, so pain. Police can use pain for compliance if you've broken the law. You're not allowing yourself to be handcuffed. They can cause pain, so you are being handcuffed. They cannot use pain to punish you. In this example, I wanted to talk about this earlier, so thank you, OE. We have this police officer, we have these very, very dangerous and unruly, these protesters are just sitting down on the sidewalk, and they are not posing any threat whatsoever. So what gives them the right to pepper spray them? This is for punishment, and this is illegal, okay? It's a private settlement that they had with the school. They were protesting at UC Davis. We don't know what the settlement is, but I am informed that all of these people who were sprayed had all their student debt wiped out. The school just paid for their tuition. So that's the question of pain. If you are making it difficult for police to do whatever it is that they need to do, they can give you pain to make you compliant, but once it gets to the point of punishment, they're not allowed to do it.
In terms of being at a store, and when they ask you to leave, technically you're expected to leave, and it'll be reasonable for them to use force if you don't leave in a reasonable amount of time. But what if you're actively causing a disturbance? Can they use the force right away, or do they still have to wait? For example, at a recent demo, they pushed out one person who was just being quiet, just holding a sign right away. And another person had a megaphone, and they used force against that person. Now, I know as a private security, they can use reasonable force, but how do you deal with it? And can you arrest someone if they used unreasonable force?
So when you're looking at a store, you're looking at the private property in the store, anybody who owns property can use reasonable force to remove you from the property. And that's commonly the issue in like these store disruptions. And reasonable goes across the board. Reasonable amount of time, reasonable amount of force, reasonable left, right, and the other thing. And who decides what's reasonable? The jury decides what's reasonable. Any of you could be a juror, and so any of you could have this internal sense of what's reasonable. I stepped in the store, I started saying something, first syllable, they grabbed me around the neck and they threw me out, okay? Is that a reasonable amount of time? Yeah, probably. I mean, if you're there and you're starting to protest, within a second, they can kick you out. If they want to, it's their property. Can they grab you around the neck and throw you out? It's probably unreasonable. Grabbing somebody around the neck, you cut off the carotid arteries, all sorts of health issues can come by. If they throw you out with too much force, you could fall and injure yourself. Why not just put their hand on your back and just shove? So the test is what's reasonable, who decides what's reasonable, the jury decides, and then you have to use your internal sense to figure out if it's reasonable or not.
In terms of obscenities, at what point does it become fighting words? Because there are times when we don't have to use some historically classified fighting words. You just use some words the average person can get angry and can get violent. So at that time, I think, you might have crossed into thinking it's okay to call someone a certain word in a certain setting. But once it rises to a certain level and it does lead to violence, can they call it was a fighting word?
So a lot of these questions, they're good questions because the law is not clear, and who clarifies it, it's the jury. And so when you bring this to the jury, some juries will say, yes, they're fighting words. Some juries will say, no, they weren't. And that's just part of the law. They can't identify at what point is pain punishment and at what point is pain not punishment. There are a lot of open questions. It's both a strength of our legal system and it's a weakness. In this instance, with fighting words, the standard is, are the words you're using likely to cause an imminent violent response? Even in that situation, you have to look at who you're inciting, right? If you are inciting, and I'm using that's a legal term, but if you are inciting a Marine who has, like, I don't know, on his shirt, like, love Trump and whatever, and you're like telling him how horrible Trump is, it's more likely that it's going to incite imminent violence, right? But if you say the same thing to the stereotypical little old lady, it's not likely to inspire, not likely to cause imminent violence. And so even whatever words you use don't matter as much as who is your target. And then again, it goes to the jury.
In terms of arresting a private citizen who has crossed a certain line, before we get to that, another thing about 55.07, there are times when violence has been directed against activists, and since I'm usually with a camera, I'm often concerned that they may pick on me because I have the proof of the violence. What am I allowed to do to defend myself? Because right now, California, according to 55.07, they're not letting me use pepper sprays either. I'm not supposed to carry them in. Is there any case where they're fighting for the legal entitlements of basically rallies, not rioters, but if you're at a rally and yes, you're protesting some government thing, why do you have to give up your entitlement to self-defense? Is there any case about that?
I'm not familiar with cases on point. I would say generally a self-defense, you're to look and see who is the aggressor and what is the reasonableness of force in between. Somebody can come at you with a knife, somebody can come at you with a fist and you respond with a gun. You think it's self-defense, but it's not proportionate, okay? And so what the law looks at, it looks at proportionality, and the law looks at, are you trying to protect yourself? This is one of the big issues in self-defense in the context of political protest, because if I'm jumped on the street, I'll fight back. If I'm jumped at a protest, I'm going to protect myself, all right? I would want other protesters to stick their bodies in between me and whoever is attacking me and not fight back, exactly because when police look at this, and if police are biased, if this goes to a jury, you know you are defending yourself, right? You took martial arts, somebody took a swing at you, you just popped them back. What happens when the police only sees that you popped them back? The cop doesn't know who goes first. So in a political protest, in that kind of a scenario, your self-defense, you can defend yourself, but defend yourself defensively, right? And then in the case, of course, where a city actually says you can't use pepper spray, don't use pepper spray.
But is that legal? Because, pepper spray is a defense that everyone else is allowed.
If it says it in the law, it's legal. If you don't like it, you take it to court. You take City of Los Angeles to court and say, City of Los Angeles, I need pepper spray for my defense. And then they work at it through the legal process. The law will not let you make an independent determination that, well, City of Los Angeles says I can't use it, but I need to use it, so I'm going to use it anyway. There's another context. If you're in a situation where you brought your pepper spray for whatever reason, and somebody pulls a gun on you, and you think that the only way you're going to save your life is to break the law and use the pepper spray, save your life. Use the pepper spray. So I would rather be in jail for 90 days than to be dead.
to that point, if you do, well, I hear what you're saying. If they say you can't bring pepper spray, you're legally not allowed to. But if you're somewhere where you can, where it's not specified, and because I've had people who like, they're in my personal space, so I'm not breaking theirs. They are confronting me, and I'm warning them, like, back up, and I've shown my pepper spray, and I'm like, back up, you need to back away or else. Is that something? And then I had another instance where I was on a college campus, someone was harassing me, telling me leave, and then later when I left and I was leaving the campus, crossing the street, they followed me and like continued kind of like restricting me, and I had my pepper spray in their face telling them, I'm going to use this if you don't leave. So I guess the location matters, but if you give that type of warning, it's like stop, or else, that doesn't give any type of
The ultimate
justification.
answer is what would the jury say? And you can have different juries say different things, but that is the ultimate answer. The next step would be imagine yourself on the jury and what do you think that you would say in that situation. Now, we should retreat. You know, if I'm standing my ground and I say back up and they're coming at me, and a jury is looking at this on video, the jury might say, I should have backed up.
Oh yeah.
Right? There's going to be a fight. Why did Mr. Friedman run away? Why did he fight back? And so there's going to be questions like that. I think in the big picture, this goes to demeanor. In the big picture, you need to look like the victim. Who you are is part of it, all right? Are you being, are you encountering one of those three people I had on the screen of the dishonorable mention, right? Do you have the Hunsab on the guy, the Hunsabber on the left who had military pants? Did you have the big anarchist on the right? Or did you have Robin, who's this little girl, little woman in the middle, right? If Robin is coming at me and I pepper spray her, the jury's gonna hate me, right? That big anarchist comes at me, I'm gonna pepper spray him when he's 15 feet away, he's coming at me. You know, if a bear is charging at me, I'm not gonna wait till he's 5 feet away, I'm gonna, you know. And so everything is context, everything is what does the jury see.
Okay. I've had multiple large men, you know, like in your face. I've had women as well who kind of think that because of the sexes that like they can get closer. But so I've had everybody. But
you know, I would hate to say go ahead and get injured at the same time if you get hit. It's not the worst thing in the world. Can you sue back?
that's true.
You know, I mean, I don't want to get hit.
Sure.
I have martial arts training. I don't want to punch anyone. I would like never to be in a fight, but I can defend myself, right? I'm not going to use martial arts as a demonstration. Again, if I'm jumping on the street, I'll do it, but not as a demonstration.
Okay.
You know, I have specialized knowledge. If somebody punches me, knocks me down, knocks me out, I'm more than happy to sue them, take their house. Not the whole house, you know. So, but it all depends.
Okay.
I have a client, trans woman, attacked by security guard threw my client down, threw her down, got on her back, started beating her back. Not a pleasant experience. She got $60,000 for being beaten on the back over about 2 minutes. So it may be that whoever attacks you doesn't have any money, there's that risk, but if you hire a lawyer, $60,000 for 2 minutes of having your back beaten, it's not bad.
This has to do with something that's no longer an issue in LA because Farmer John's shut down. But in many places around the world, activists think they're entitled to block a truck and stuff. And I think that may qualify as false imprisonment. Can you touch on that?
So it's not false imprisonment. False imprisonment restricts you, I'll say, to a container, to a room. Somebody grabs your arm, you can't leave. That's false imprisonment, okay? I had a security guard grab my client by the arm, came up behind her, grabbed her by the arm. She couldn't move 10 seconds, and that's false imprisonment because she couldn't move. Lock somebody in a room, they can't move. But if you stand in front of a truck, the truck can go left, the truck can go right, so there's no imprisonment. They have the whole universe they can travel. So, but it is disruption of a business, and that's where they would get you.
Okay. So the cases where you block the truck from going where they need to, would that be false imprisonment? Because that's basically what they do. They block the truck from being able to move.
Is it a intentional malicious blocking? Then yes, that would be disruption, not false imprisonment. There was a case in Disneyland, somebody set up a table in the pathway of a tram. The tram had to divert to get around the table, and the table was a protest table of some sort, literature, I don't remember the issue. Because the tram had to divert, it was obstruction, okay? If he had set that table up to the side, no obstruction. Anyone else? So I gave my business cards out. My email address is easy, jerry@activistlaw.com. I've been an activist for 30 years, give or take. I've been a lawyer for 10 years, give or take. I'm here as an activist. I wanted to learn the law. I've gotten a lot of bad legal advice from the police. I had enough, so I went to law school. I am here for you. If you are practicing your free speech on any progressive issue, it doesn't have to be animal rights. If you want to be engaged in free speech against violence against Palestinians, against violence against women, any progressive issue, have any question, please contact me. This is why I became an attorney. I want to help you. All right. Thank you. Thank you for organizing this.